Alright, listen, I'm gonna be real with you guys. There are a lot of Abeloth videos on YouTube. Very few of them feel like they venture beyond the most basic summary from the Star Wars wiki page, and I get it. I'm a YouTuber, I've used Wikipedia before, and Fate of the Jedi, the book series which Abeloth came from, well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, I know what you're thinking. Ek, haven't you done an Abeloth lore video before? Yeah, I've done a bunch. In the past 5 years, I've reread Fate of the Jedi twice, and every time I do a new batch of videos. But something fairly major has happened since then. Abeloth, as a character, has re-entered the zeitgeist because of, well, Ahsoka. The end of Ahsoka, spoiler alert of course, sees Baylan Shin, no, that's not his name, Baylan Skoll, I'm combining characters, standing on a figure of the father which is pointing towards the distance. Given the presence of the Mortis family and allusions to hidden power which he's seeking out, many are assuming that the mother, Abeloth, will be the next major antagonist in Star Wars, perhaps even transitioning from the Mando era to the post-sequel era. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but you do need to understand what Abeloth is, and I also want to deconstruct some of the more popular misconceptions. Now, as a warning, there's not very much art for Abeloth. The best art, by the way, was actually commissioned by me. I had it made for a thumbnail. I kind of wish people would stop using it without credit, but whatever. I'm certainly no altar boy. So let's talk about the ones. Maybe you've heard them referred to as the Celestials. There's definitely some interesting backstory there, with Star Wars Legends, the expanded universe, doing some legwork to make the creatures which appeared in the Clone Wars tie in with pre-existing lore regarding the presence of a long-gone, super powerful race in the Star Wars galaxy. The idea of Celestials or Builders, as I mentioned, is not new. For example, in the Corellian trilogy, we learn all about Centerpoint Station, which was essentially a massive gravity gun, which people believed was used to artificially create the Corellian system. The word celestial wasn't actually used at this point. They were called architects typically, but later works would not only identify the species as the Celestials, but also tie them in with the Mortis family, which would appear in the Clone Wars. Now, it does appear that Dave Filoni sort of gave the Fate of the Jedi writers a heads up, but the connection and the sort of implied relationship wasn't really a two-way thing, which is not surprising. The Mortis gods are obviously key, and George Lucas probably saw them key, to some deeper aspect of Star Wars mythology. So where the books were happy to make the connection with something on TV, the ones in the Clone Wars, for example, are never really nailed down. And that's why in canon, Celestials, as far as I know, don't really exist. Certainly not as the moniker for the Mortis family. And what I'm saying here extends to the lore surrounding Abeloth. Abeloth, as I'll talk about in a minute, fits into the role of mother within the Mortis family, but again, that's a creation of the Fate of the Jedi book series, and was really their way to tie Abeloth into what was going on TV. That's important because whatever happens in Ahsoka Season 2, it will probably be the vision of Dave Filoni, and there's no indication that Dave Filoni saw a mother with the Mortis family, or certainly that the mother was anything like Abeloth. However, that doesn't mean she's not going to show up. It's very possible that he will take inspiration from either the idea of a mother or Abeloth in particular, and it wouldn't be the first time that Legends had been reflected by canon. Coruscant, for example, was actually first named in Star Wars Legends, although the idea of an Imperial capital planet, sometimes called Imperial Center, was present in early drafts of Episode 6. But characters, ideas, whatever, Legends has contributed to canon, certainly. And we're talking here about a show starring Grand Admiral Thrawn, so I think that goes without saying. Alright, so you want to learn about Abeloth, where now? Well, this is where things get complicated and why I'm not really surprised that the state of Abeloth lore is a little sketchy. So Abeloth appears in the final major book series of Star Wars Legends, that was Fate of the Jedi. It ran from 2009 to 2011, it was 9 novels, and I'd say it has mixed reception among fans. I personally like it, but it's a bit weird. It continues Legacy of the Force's introduction of Lost Sith. This time there's an entire tribe of them. It's got some weird plot threads, like Luke being essentially kicked out of the Galactic Alliance, which is what the New Republic has transitioned into. Natasi Dalla, for some reason, is chief of state. And of course, Abeloth is introduced as basically a Lovecraftian entity for the good guys to face off. Fate of the Jedi is not only difficult to get into because it's a 9-book series, but also because it builds fairly heavily off of, well, a lot of reading. For things to make sense, you probably want to have read the New Jedi Order, which, by the way, is 19 novels, plus the 3 books of the Swarm War, plus, probably most importantly, the 9 Legacy of the Force books. Plus, the whole time it's assuming you know characters who may have been introduced in a random novel like 2 decades earlier. So there's a lot to discuss relating to Abeloth, and I'm really going to encourage you guys to check out my past videos, because I think I did a good job, even though they're quite old, of breaking down who she is, her powers, all of those things, and they're all released much closer to a recent rereading of Fate of the Jedi, which I haven't done in a few years and I'm definitely due for. But just to end this video, I do want to talk basically about how Abeloth fits into the Mortis family, because I think that's probably the most relevant bit. If she does appear in Ahsoka, you'll often hear people say that Abeloth drank from the font of power. What's that really mean? Well, Fate of the Jedi really starts with Luke and his son Ben investigating Sinkhole Station, or at least that's pretty early on. We learn that the Maw cluster, and yes, the Maw, which has appeared many times in Star Wars Legends, is getting a little funky, and we later learn that Abeloth, the creature, had basically been imprisoned within a sheath of black holes. Centerpoint Station, which I mentioned earlier, was destroyed in the Legacy of the Force series during the Second Galactic Civil War. It sort of messed up the galactic balance, and it allows her to escape, something that's happened before, and she'd also, even from within her prison, been corrupting the minds of Jedi who were hiding near the Maw during the Yuuzhan Vong War. Again, I said, we're pretty self-referential at this point. Anyway, Luke and Ben travel to Sinkhole Station. They're also retracing Jason Solo's steps, by the way, after he'd fallen to the dark side. And they meet Mindwalkers. These are beings basically on the edge of death who are keyed into the Matrix, except the Matrix is Beyond Shadows. Beyond Shadows has several really interesting locations. To be clear, Beyond Shadows is almost like the world between worlds, but with a more physical reality to it. Places also seem to have real-world counterparts, including, yes, the Font of Power, which, according to one of the Mindwalkers, has the ability to give you the power to achieve anything. Luke Skywalker, however, wisely chooses not to use the Font of Power to save the Jedi Order, and we later learn a bit more about the true nature of Abeloth and the Celestials in the final book of the series, Fate of the Jedi Apocalypse. I've talked about this before, but essentially, we learn from the Killiks who serve the Celestials sort of a rough and somewhat metaphorical history, that the ones are what become of Celestials. Whatever that means, it's never quite clear, but they seem to have emerged from the Force itself. As we see in the Clone Wars, there's the father, the son, and the daughter. Abeloth, as a mortal being, somehow joins the family, and it actually seems to go pretty well. She turns them into a proper family, the only problem being that she ages, which causes her to drink from the Font of Power and later swim in another location, the Pool of Knowledge. These were not the ones Beyond Shadows. These were the ones actually on their homeworld. She's transformed from an elderly woman into a being with, and I quote, hair grown coarse and long, nose flattened until it was practically gone, sparkling eyes grown sunken and dark so that all that could be seen of them were the twinkles. She was raising her arms towards a cowering daughter and a glowering son, with long tentacles lashing from where her fingers should have been. Whether she's transformed into a Celestial or something completely different is a question the Killiks can't answer, but what is clear and what could also be relevant to Ahsoka or the post-Ahsoka universe is that she embodies chaos and destruction in the galaxy. Abeloth is not really a being which can be destroyed, at least not easily. She's often locked up, but she escapes, and her escape and her joining the wider galaxy is always during times of great conflict. And I quote, "Sometimes when war grows too powerful, the bringer of chaos is released. She shatters the old order so a new one can rise." It's then speculated that she's about to be released again because of essentially 5,000 years of war between the Jedi and the Sith. I think that's one of the aspects of her character which is often ignored and which is also quite interesting. But this video is getting a bit long, so I'm going to leave it at that. I think I've hopefully cleared up some misconceptions and also given you a basic introduction to the character. Now, you can decide whether you think she'll appear in Star Wars canon, whether you think she should. Now, if you want more, I highly encourage just put Abeloth Eckhart's Ladder. You'll find a bunch of my older videos, and I think they're pretty good. Let me know your thoughts, of course, down below.